Devotionals today is the parable of the hammers. And you won't find this parable in the scriptures, but you know, Jesus often taught with parables where he would take something that was common to the everyday person and try to relate it to a more spiritual or heavenly meaning. And that's what I hope to do today with all of these hammers you see here. I'm pretty sure that all of you have a hammer. All of these hammers are from my personal collection, and these aren't all the ones that I have. I've got several others besides these. And one thing you'll notice about all of them is they've been used. There's not a single one here that hasn't been well used. And you know, we're a lot like these hammers. They have a similar shape, and we all kind of have a similar shape. And although there's some overlap, the hammers can do some of the same things that some of the other hammers can do. They all have a unique purpose or an individual purpose, and so do we. The hammer's general purpose is to hit something with a certain amount of force, and our general purpose is found in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. You know, Logan's been kind of talking about this in his Sunday night series as he goes through Ephesians. But Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says, "For we are all his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." But we also have individual purposes. God has designed each one of us with certain skills or talents or callings to do his work that he has prepared for us to do. Now, these hammers each has an individual purpose too, even though there's some overlap. The big sledgehammer here is real useful for breaking up concrete or driving a wedge in a log to make some firewood or lots of other stuff, usually for demolition purposes. And if you've ever used a sledgehammer, you know that after you've swung it for a while, you start getting worn out. It doesn't take very long because this is heavy and it takes a certain amount of force to use it. And when you get worn out, at least me, I start getting a little less accurate with my swings, and I'm kind of all over the place, getting out of control sometimes. And when that happens, why, you can do more damage than good. This hammer here is, I like to call it a little hand sledge, because it's kind of like a sledgehammer, but it's smaller. The actual name for this hammer is a club hammer. And because it's a little less weight, but still got some weight to it, you can deliver a pretty good blow. And because the handle's a little shorter, you have much better control of what you're hitting. Maintaining control is important in living for God, because when we're out of control, we can't really be that effective in doing his work. Proverbs 25:28 says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." And you know, self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It's important that we maintain control if we want to be effective for God. Now, this little hammer here, is this a hammer or is this a hatchet? Does anybody here know what this is for?
No.
This is a drywall hammer for hanging sheetrock. And the face of it is all rounded, and so when you drive a nail into a piece of sheetrock, it doesn't tear the paper. And so then you can come later, leaves a little dimple, you can come later with joint compound and fill it in. The back side, the hatchet side, has several purposes. I've used this hammer quite a bit actually. A long time ago, I built the house that we're living in. And so some of these hammers were very important to me in building that house. But the hatchet side, suppose you have a piece of sheetrock on the wall and something's not aligned just right and needs to slide over slightly, you can take this and scrape some of that sheetrock right off the end of that sheet and then slide it into position. Another thing you can do is if you have one sheet already nailed to the wall and then another sheet goes up but needs to slide down just a little bit, you can stick this in the crack between the two sheets and just wedge it a little bit and move it down ever so slightly to align it with a stud on the other end. And the other thing that I use it mostly for was if you have to make a cut out for around an electrical outlet or lighting fixture outlet, you can just chop right into the sheetrock, put a hole in it, and then you stick your little drywall saw in there and you cut out that little opening. So what we learned from this hammer is that it has many uses. It's a multi-purpose hammer, and that's kind of the same for us. Most of us have more than one skill or one talent, but sometimes we're reluctant to do more than one thing. So what we need to learn from this is use all the talents that we have and all the skills that we've been given by God to serve Him. These are both claw hammers, and I would bet every single one of you has a claw hammer. Pretty obvious why it's called a claw hammer. This hammer here was given to me when I was about 10 years old by my dad. This is the oldest hammer I have, so it's over 60 years old. The handle used to be kind of a soft, pliable rubber. It's just as hard as the steel is now over the years. But you know what? It's still very useful. I do a lot of painting of various parts and stuff in my car restorations that I do. And I've got a little paint cart that I made, and it's got a piece of pegboard mounted up on the back of it. And this little hammer hangs right on there. And what I use it for these days is hammering the lids back on the paint cans. That's why it's got paint all over it. But no matter how old you are, you can still serve God. There's no limit, no age limit on serving God. So for us that are getting older, we always need to remember, it doesn't matter that I may not be as good as I used to be, but I can still serve God in one way or another. Now this big claw hammer is actually called a framing hammer, and it's got a big head on it. It's 28 ounces. You see the face of it's kind of got a crosshatch pattern. When you hit a nail, kind of gives you some grip. You can see this one's pretty worn down because it's been used a lot. But it grips that nail and less chance of slipping off of it. And when I first got this hammer, it was about 4 or 5 inches longer on the handle here. You grab it back here, and with this weight and that leverage, you can drive a 16 penny nail into a 2x4 with one swing. But what I found I was doing was bending over a lot of nails because I wasn't that accurate with my swing. But I found if I choked up a little bit, like to right here, I had much more control and could hit the nail more regularly right on the head and drive it in. It took me maybe 2 swings to knock them in, but it was a lot more efficient than swinging back here, kind of being out of control. What we learned from that is sometimes we need to modify the way we're behaving or the way we approach things a little bit to be more efficient and more able to meet the target and do what we're wanting to do. And of course, sometimes we're going to miss no matter how hard we're trying, and we'll bend over a nail. We need to straighten it up, try again, or pull it out and start over. And it's the same for us in living our lives for God. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to do some things and say some things that perhaps we shouldn't have. Well, God has given us a method for straightening out that nail, so to speak. It's called forgiveness. He's given us the ability to forgive others and to seek forgiveness when we need it. So we need to always keep that in mind, that mistakes are going to happen, but they can be corrected. Now this little hammer here actually is a mallet. It's a little rawhide mallet, and you wouldn't think you could do too much with this, but sometimes a gentle touch is required. And this little mallet, if I need to just knock something over slightly to align it, I can do that without damaging the surface because, this is rawhide and it's, not going to leave a scratch or mar the surface I'm tapping on. Sometimes in life, a gentle touch is required. You can't just go in there with the big sledgehammer and be successful. Jim Stout comes to mind when I talk about someone with a gentle touch, because he could be in any situation and he knew just the right words to say and the tone to use to always have a positive outcome. And we need to strive to, when a gentle touch is necessary, to do it. Now, this hammer here is a sheet metal hammer, one that a person in the HVAC business putting ductwork up in your attic would use. And I didn't even know I needed this hammer, but you know what? This has become the most useful hammer that I've ever had, and I use it more than any of other hammers I have. And I found this hammer. That's why I said I didn't even know I needed it, but I found it. I used to have a little retail business, and I was going to run some wires up through the false ceiling one time, and this was laying up there. So when the building was built, apparently the sheet metal worker left his hammer up there. But I found that it's the most useful hammer I have. And what we can learn from that is sometimes we may not realize how useful we can be with something that we know we can do or that we can do because we just don't apply that thing. And if we would just sometimes give something a try, we might find out that, hey, I'm a lot more useful at doing this than I thought I was. So I would say don't be afraid to try new things and learn from what you might be able to do. Now this little hammer here, I don't really have an application for it. Maybe you can think of one. But this is a tack hammer, or commonly called an upholsterer's hammer. And if you see the face of it, it's got a little split right here. And this portion is kind of like a horseshoe magnet. So when you have a little bitty tack or nail, like this one, you can't really hold it very good to get it started. But because that's magnetic, you can just put that tack right on the end of the hammer. And then when you need to put it somewhere, you just, you can knock it in like that and then turn the hammer over and continue hammering again. Like I said, I don't really have a life lesson from this. Maybe you can think of one. But I thought it was a neat hammer, so I wanted to show it to you. And the last hammer I brought with me today is this here. This is a body hammer for doing body work on a car. And it used to have this on the back of it. This side here is called a shrinking head, where you hammer it into sheet metal, and because these little teeth in here, it'll kind of like shrink the sheet metal. So if your sheet metal is stretched, a few blows with this, why it'll kind of shrink it up, you can get your dents out. But what I found when this broke off is that this hammer became much more useful, because I don't have the weight of this back here causing it to possibly, get out of alignment when I'm hitting. And then also, because it's shorter now, I can get into areas like in between the door panel where I couldn't get before. And I can get in there and tap, 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 tap. Sometimes we have an injury, we may have a disability, we may have even a terminal disease. But just because we think we're broken doesn't mean that we can't be useful in serving God. Sometimes that disability or that injury or whatever it might be makes us more useful in many cases. Just like this little guy, he's broken in half, but he's more useful now than he was before. So don't ever think that because I'm hurting that I can't do something, because God can use you in any way, even if it's very minor. You can still be encouraging and an example to those around you. We learned something else from this hammer. It usually doesn't work alone, because if you're just hammering on a piece of sheet metal on a fender or a door or whatever, you're just going to put dents into it. But your goal is to get a dent out that's already in there. And the way you do that is you use a backup. This is a dolly. They come in lots of shapes. This one has a curvature here. It's got curvature around here. But they make flat ones and various things. So you put this on one side of the sheet metal, you tap on the other side, and between the two, you can smooth that sheet metal out and get those dents out. Sometimes it's necessary or preferable for us to work with somebody else. We don't have to do everything on our own or by ourselves. If you need a helper, if the task calls for 2 people, many times visiting others, in the Bible it tells us we're sent out 2 by 2. So don't be afraid to get someone to go along with you and work with you. None of these hammers do everything that every other hammer does, but each one can do something special. And it's the same for us. In Romans 12, verse 6 says, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. And none of these hammers is more important than the other one. Each one has its place in the toolbox. Each one has a specific task that it's really good at. And it's the same for us. We're all members of God's church with a certain purpose, and none are more important than the other. In 1 Corinthians 12, 21 through 26 says, and the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. No, much rather those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these we bestow greater honor. And our unpresentable parts have greater modesty, but our presentable parts have no need. But God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it, that there should be no division in the body, but that the members should have the same care for one another. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all the members rejoice in it. Kind of like all these hammers being in the toolbox, each one is needed. None is more important than the other. And I'm going to wind this down now. 1 Peter 4:10 says, "And each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God." Men, each one of you has a purpose in serving God. So I encourage you to find your purpose and use it. And remember, if the hammer never comes out of the toolbox, it's of little value. Thanks for your attention.
If you would like more information, or if you'd like to participate in our Bible studies and worship services, we would love to have you come join us at the Northeast Church of Christ in Albuquerque, New Mexico.